Good afternoon. This will be another recording for the Brisbane Stoics. We have a meeting coming up on Sunday and we'll be focusing on Epictetus, the Discourses and Selected Writings, using the hard translation. We're going right back to the start now, and we're going to start with Book 1, Chapter 1. Before jumping into the text, however, I'd like to consider some of the themes that A.A. Long directs our attention to in his Epictetus, a Stoic and Socratic Guide to Life. He says that there are four principal concepts that give Epictetus's philosophy its unity and coherence. Those are freedom, judgment, volition, and integrity. And they're the things that we'll be looking forward for as we do the readings. According to Long, the freedom that interests Epictetus is entirely psychological and attitudinal. It is freedom from being constrained or impeded by any external circumstance or emotional reaction. He diagnoses unhappiness as subservience to persons, happenings, values, and bodily conditions, all of which involve the individual subject in surrendering autonomy and becoming a victim to debilitating emotions. Happiness, by contrast, is unimpededness, doing and experiencing only what you want to do and experience, serenity, absence of any sense that things might be better for you than you find them to be. Judgment. The basis for this ideal of freedom brings us to the second core concept, says Long. Following his Stoic authorities, Epictetus regards all mental states, including emotions, as conditioned by judgments. On this model of mind, there is no such thing as a purely reactive emotion, or at least a reaction that we cannot on reflection control. How we experience the world and how we experience ourselves depends through and through on the judgments we form. Judgments about the structure of the world, the necessary conditions of human life, goodness, badness, and above all, what is psychologically up to us. The crucial idea is that we do not experience the world without the mediation of our own assessments. This rationalistic analysis of emotions and evaluations implies that they themselves and the judgments on which they depend are completely in our power, up to us, within the control of our will. Regarding volition, Long writes, the crucial idea is that volition is what persons are in terms of their mental faculties, consciousness, character, judgments, goals, and desires. Volition is the self, what each of us is, as abstracted from the body. You and I are not our bodies, nor even do we own our bodies. Our essential selves, are our volitions. In that domain, and only in that domain, we have the possibility of freedom. What is required of anyone who wants genuine freedom is to transfer all wants, values, and attachments away from externals and situate them within the scope of one's volition. Prohairesis, or volition, is the locus of all that truly matters to humans who have understood cosmic order and their own natures and capacities. Its perfection is the human good and the goal of Epictetus's teaching. Like earlier Stoics, he holds that goodness and badness in the strict sense pertains only to what accords or fails to accord with our essential human nature. That is to say, our nature as rational animals. A perfected volition, then, is good in this strict sense, and no other objective is comparably deserving. Consequently, everything that falls outside of the individual's volition, including family, status, country, the condition of one's body, material prosperity, all of these are inessential to its perfection and the freedom or happiness that this perfection constitutes. Not only are these things inessential, but also attachment to them is a certain recipe for disappointment, anxiety, and unhappiness. And finally, concerning integrity, Long says, I use this word to translate a cluster of terms Epictetus repeatedly uses that can be rendered by such words as shame, reverence, trustworthiness, conscience, decency. Integrity is as much a part of Epictetus's normative self as a good volition. In fact, it is not distinct from a good volition, but the way that mental disposition is disposed in relation to other persons. Volition as oneself is where one's interests lie. It determines what one calls I and mine. A good volition, because it values itself over everything else, includes integrity. It treats integrity as essential to its own interests. Integrity involves honoring all of one's ties to kin, social roles, and other acquired relationships. In this case, Epictetus is a moralist, not because he sets out from a position with regard to our duties to other persons, but because his bedrock principle of cultivating the self as a good volition entails uncompromising integrity, respect, cooperation, justice, and kindliness, with respect to every human being one encounters, or is by family or circumstance related to us. In the introduction by Robin Hard, we find some commentary by Hard that is very, very useful for us moving forward, where he identifies several subjects that appear prominently in the discourses. So to quote from Hard, we can identify 3 subjects or clusters of subjects that are especially prominent in the discourses. All 3 subjects are also important in other writings on Stoic ethics. The Epictetus's treatment sometimes has distinctive emphasis. One is our capacity for rational agency, and a second, our capacity for ethical, especially social development. A third is the idea that these capacities form key distinctive features of human nature within the framework of a divinely shaped universe. A cluster of ideas prominent in the discourses can be linked with the notion of rational agency. One is the idea that we can and should distinguish clearly between what is up to us, or in our power, F. Hamann, and what is not up to us, and focus our concern and desire on the first group rather than the second. The first group consists of psychological states and responses, such as beliefs and motives, and the second of our bodily condition, property, or social standing. This theme is sometimes linked with the idea that we can and should examine our impressions, perceptions, and thoughts before assenting to them. In particular, we should be careful not to attach the notion of good or bad inappropriately, that is, to externals such as our bodily condition or property. Doing so produces negative and misguided emotions such as disappointment or resentment. These 2 themes are often expressed in terms of our use of prohoresis. This is a standard Greek term meaning decision or choice, and one that plays a major role in Aristotle's ethical writings. Epictetus uses it to mean the kind of rational agency that is expressed in focusing on what is up to us and examining impressions. Hard introduces the discourses by Epictetus by saying, in 1.1, Epictetus begins by presenting the reasoning faculty as the one which, unlike other arts and faculties, comprehends both itself and other faculties. He then isolates one salient aspect of this faculty, which enables us to make right use of our impressions, which encapsulates this combination of self-management and management of other things. The latter capacity is described by contrast with our bodily condition, possessions, and personal relationships as the only thing that is wholly up to us, or within our power. This idea is presented by saying that this capacity, which is a portion of divinity, is the only one that Zeus, king of the gods, could place wholly within our power. Epictetus goes on to maintain that typically we misuse this capacity. We concern ourselves with the things that are not up to us, possessions, and so on. Instead, we should make the best of what lies within our power and deal with everything else as it comes. This recommendation is then illustrated by a series of imagined dialogues, some of them involving historical figures, including famous Stoicism-inspired examples of resistance to tyrannical attitudes or actions by Roman emperors. Each of these is designed to show what is involved in making the best of what lies within our power, and at the same time dealing with everything else as regards our body or continued life as it comes. These examples show, as he points out, what it means to train oneself in the matters in which one ought to train oneself. Now, with that preamble out of the way, let's jump into the text. Okay. 1.1. About things that are within our power and those that are not. 1. Among all the arts and faculties, you'll find none that can take itself as an object of study, and consequently none that can pass judgment or approval or disapproval upon itself. In the case of grammar, how far does its power of observation extend? Only as far as to pass judgment on what is written, and in the case of music, only as far as to pass judgment on the melody. Does either of them, then, make itself an object of study? Not at all. If you're writing to a friend, grammar will tell you what letters you ought to choose. But as to whether or not you ought to write to your friend, grammar won't tell you that. And the same is true of music and with regard to melodies. As to whether or not you should sing or play the lyre at this time, that is something that music won't tell you. What will tell you then? The faculty that takes both itself and everything else as an object of study. And what is that? The faculty of reason. For that alone, of all the faculties that we've been granted, is capable of understanding both itself, what it is capable of, and what value it contributes, and all the other faculties too. For what else is it that tells us that gold is beautiful? For the gold itself doesn't tell us. It is clear then that this is the faculty that has the capacity to deal with impressions. What else can judge music, grammar, and the other arts and faculties, and assess the use that we make of them, and indicate the proper occasions for their use? None, other than this. It was fitting then that the gods have placed in our power only the best faculty of all, the one that rules over all the others, that which enables us to make right use of our impressions. But everything else they haven't placed within our power. Was it that they didn't want to? I think for my part that if they could, they would have entrusted those other powers to us too. But that was something that they just couldn't do. For in view of the fact that we're here on earth and are shackled to a body like our own, and to such companions as we have, how could it be possible that, in view of all that, we shouldn't be hampered by external things? But what does Zeus have to say about this? If it had been possible, Epictetus, I would have ensured that your poor body and petty possessions were free and immune from hindrance. But as things are, you must forget that this body isn't truly your own, but is nothing more than cleverly molded clay. But since I couldn't give you that, I've given you a certain portion of myself, this faculty of motivation to act and not to act, of desire and aversion, and in a word, the power to make proper use of impressions. If you pay good heed to this, and entrust all that you have to its keeping, you'll never be hindered, never obstructed, and you'll never groan, never find fault, and never flatter anyone at all. What? Does all of that strike you as being of small account? Certainly not. So you're content with that? I pray so, to the gods. But as things are, although we have it in our power to apply ourselves to one thing alone and devote ourselves to that, we choose instead to apply ourselves to many things and attach ourselves to many, to our body and our possessions and our brother and friend and child and slave. And so being attached in this way to any number of things, we're weighed down by them and dragged down. That is why if the weather prevents us from sailing, we sit there in a state of anxiety, constantly peering around. What wind is this? The north wind. And what does it matter to us and to him? When will the west wind blow? When it so chooses, my good friend, or rather, when Aeolus chooses, for God hasn't appointed you to be controller of the winds. He has appointed Aeolus. What are we to do then? To make the best of what lies within our power and deal with everything else as it comes. How does it come then? As God wills. What am I to be, beheaded now and alone? Why would you want everyone to be beheaded for your consolation? Aren't you willing to stretch out your neck as Lateranus did at Rome when Nero ordered that he should be beheaded? For he stretched out his neck, received the blow, and when it proved to be too weak, shrank back for an instant, but then stretched out his neck again. And moreover, on an earlier occasion when Epaphroditus came to him and asked him why he had fallen out with the emperor, he replied, "If I care to, I'll explain that to your master." What then should we have at hand to help us in such emergencies? Why, what else than to know what is mine and what isn't mine, and what is in my power and what isn't? I must die. So must I die groaning too? I must be imprisoned. So must I grieve at that too? I must depart into exile. So can anyone prevent me from setting off with a smile, cheerfully and serenely? Tell me the secrets. I won't reveal them, for that lies within my power. Then I'll have you chained up. What are you saying, man? Chain me up? You can chain my leg, but not even Zeus can overcome my power of choice. I'll throw you into prison. You mean my poor body. I'll have you beheaded. Why did I ever tell you that I'm the only man to have a neck that can't be severed? These are the thoughts that those who embark on philosophy ought to reflect upon. It is these that they should write about day after day, and it is in these that they should train themselves. Thrasea was in the habit of saying, "I'd rather be killed today than be sent into exile tomorrow." So what did Rufus say in reply? If you choose death as being the heavier misfortune, what a foolish choice that is. If you choose it as being the lighter, who has granted you that choice? Aren't you willing to be content with what is granted to you? So what was it that Agrippinus used to say? I won't become an obstacle to myself. The news was brought to him that your case is being tried in the Senate. May everything go well. But the 5th hour has arrived. This was the hour in which he was in the habit of taking his exercise and then having a cold bath. Let's go off and take some exercise. When he had completed his exercise, someone came and told him, You've been convicted. To exile? He asked. Or to death? To exile. What about my property? It hasn't been confiscated. Then let's get away to Aricia and eat our meal there. This is what it means to train oneself in the matters in which one ought to train oneself, to have rendered one's desires incapable of being frustrated, and one's aversions incapable of falling into what they want to avoid. I'm bound to die. If at once, I'll go to my death. If somewhat later, I'll eat my meal, since the hour has arrived for me to do so, and then die afterwards. And how? As it suits someone who is giving back that which is not his own. You might like to pause at this point and consider these two questions. Is Epictetus' use of what is up to us actually the same thing as what is in your control? If it is, then is the dichotomy of control alone an adequate distillation of the kind of principles that Epictetus is attempting to teach us? what follows is a kind of satirical take, or extreme version of this idea of control, um, presenting itself as the kind of defining feature of Epictetus's Stoic philosophy. Dear Bill, thank you for clarifying for me the dichotomy of control. It has really helped me to face adversity given recent times. It has helped me to ignore the consequences of things not in my control. Here in Australia, interest rates have been climbing, not in my control, and my wages have not increased, not in my control. I realized the bank was going to take my unit, not in my control. Thanks to my understanding of Stoic philosophy, I realized I should work out what is in my control and commit to that course of action. The unit is insured for a sum of money, so I burnt it down, in my control. I did it at night, so there would be no witnesses, in my control. All is well now, Zeus be praised. One small thing, however, the neighbours were not expected home for another week, but due to unforeseen circumstances came home early, not in my control. I assume they were so tired from jet lag that they didn't even notice the smoke, not in my control. They should have checked their smoke alarm batteries, not in my control. Life is short anyway, and as Marcus Aurelius says, individual human life is relatively insignificant. So thanks anyway, Bill. Stoicism has really helped me to discover how to rationally identify what is important, to know what is in my control, and that the obverse is irrelevant. Well, that letter, of course, is an extreme case of taking Epictetus's philosophy regarding what is in our control to mean something that is definitely not intended. It is important to point out that such an observation is not entirely trivial. It is clearly possible that a modern Stoic readership, interpreting through the lens of self-help and positive forms of psychology, may come to such a conclusion, as noted by Will Johncock in his recent book, Beyond the Individual. There is something shared between our mind and an entire universe, and therefore between our mind and other humans' minds. This unsettles straightforward oppositional distinctions between what is supposedly internal versus external to the self. Such considerations might duly spark discussions that unsettle the branding of Stoicism as a tool that individuals can use to mentally defy an anxiety-inducing out there world. There is a voracious appetite in the self-help market for reductions of Stoic philosophy to assertions around mental self-definition and personal control. Such adaptations must be complemented through, though, with a kind of reading which appreciates that for the Stoics, your rational mind is dispersed in and among other people's minds. If what is mental has shared roots and operations, then mental control is a collaborative exercise. This idea that our individual rationality is grounded beyond us collectively, or even in a universal form of rationality, what the Stoics call reason, or Zeus, recalls Hard's comment, cited earlier, that, quote, Epictetus's treatment sometimes has distinctive emphases. One is our capacity for rational agency, and a second, our capacity for ethical, especially social development. A third is the idea that these capacities form key distinctive features of human nature within the framework of a divinely shaped universe. End quote. Likewise, Pierre Hadot, in his Philosophy as a Way of Life, emphasizes the uniqueness of the Stoic perspective. As an attempt to transform one's consciousness above and beyond our individual and entirely subjectively concerned experiences, by rejecting our instinctual tendency to accept on face value the appearance of things and rather to take an objective or cosmic view, such a view takes the world to be a living cosmic animal of which we are a part. Reason as God is throughout the universe, and for us to live according to virtue, it is incumbent on us to see beyond immediate self-preserving appearances of things, and live in ways that actualize our rational ends. Such an approach to life is the best defense against vicissitude and misfortune. We find Socrates himself making similar claims when he defends philosophy's noble requirements in his arguments with Callicles in the Gorgias. Socrates says, "I believe that I am one of a few Athenians, so as not to say I'm the only one, but the only one among our contemporaries to take up the true political craft and practice the true politics. This is because the speeches I make on each occasion do not aim at gratification, but at what's best. They don't aim at what's most pleasant. And because I'm not willing to do these clever things that you recommend, I won't know what to say in court. And the same account I applied to Polus comes back to me, for I'll be judged the way a doctor would be judged by a jury of children if a pastry chef were to bring accusations against him. Think about what a man like that, taken captive among these people, could say in his defense. If somebody were to accuse him and say, 'Children, this man has worked many great evils on you.' Yes, on you! He destroys the youngest among you by cutting and burning them, and by slimming them down and choking them, he confuses them. He gives them the most bitter potions to drink and forces hunger and thirst on them. He doesn't feast you on a great varieties of sweets the way that I do." What do you think a doctor caught in such an evil predicament could say? Or if he should tell them the truth and say, "Yes, children, I was doing all those things in the interest of health," how big an uproar do you think such judges would make? Wouldn't it be a loud one? And Callicles says, "Perhaps so." "I should think so. Don't you think he'd be at a total loss as to what he should say?" Callicles says, "Yes, he would be." And Socrates, "That's the sort of thing I know would happen to me too if I came into court, for I won't be able to point out any pleasures that I've provided for them, ones they believe to be services and benefits, while I envy neither of those who provide them nor the ones for whom they're provided. Nor will I be able to say what's true if someone charges that I ruin younger people by confusing them, or abuse older ones by speaking bitter words against them in public or private. I won't be able to say, that is, 'Yes, I say, do all those things in the interest of justice, my honoured judges,' to use that expression you people use, nor anything else. So presumably, I'll get whatever comes my way." Callicles says, "Do you think, Socrates, that a man in such a position in his city, a man who's unable to protect himself, is to be admired?" Socrates replies, "Yes, Callicles, as long as he has one thing that you've often agreed he should have, as long as he has protected himself against having spoken or done anything unjust relating to either men or gods. For this is the self-protection that you and I have often agreed avails the most. Now, if someone were to refute me and prove that I am unable to provide this protection for myself, or for anyone else, I would feel shame at being refuted, whether this happened in the presence of many or a few, or just between the two of us. And if I were to be put to death for the lack of this ability, I really would be upset. But if I came to my end because of a deficiency in flattering oratory, I know that you'd see me bear my death with ease. For no one who isn't totally bereft of reason and courage is afraid to die. Doing what's unjust is what he's afraid of. For to arrive in Hades with one's soul stuffed full of unjust actions is the ultimate of all bad things. If you like, I'm willing to give you an account showing that this is so." And if you haven't read the Gorgias, the account that follows is very entertaining. So anyway, although Epictetus's prohoresis is concerned with the control that we have over the rational faculty, Awareness of control is only part of the philosophical process. So, and following Socrates' demonstration of his understanding that the best defense in life is not merely to live as long as possible, but to live a life that honors both gods and men, that is, to pay attention to oneself as a being whose own nature is grounded in universal reason, first and foremost, and whose own individuality is but a trace of the order and coherence of reason that penetrates, motivates, and vitalizes the cosmos throughout. It might be argued then that Stoicism is a perspective that aims to educate us in the correct use of reason in forming judgments about the value and the use of things. Thank you. And of course, here's the reference list. They're all very interesting books, and I'm sure you'll get great benefit from reading them all, having them in your library to enjoy. That's all we have time for today. So I'll see you at the meeting on Sunday if you're going. And otherwise, please enjoy this presentation. Thanks.